My story wasn't easy, but I survived the cruelest lesson about family loyalty and showed them exactly who I really am. Let me tell you about the night that changed everything between me and my future mother-in-law.
When Sarah told me what Patricia said, my heart broke for her. That girl has more class in her pinky finger than Patricia has. In her whole body.
My name is Sarah, and this happened 3 years ago when I was 26 and planning my wedding to the man I thought was the love of my life. His name was Marcus, and we'd been together for 2 years. Everything seemed perfect until I met his family, specifically his mother, Patricia. From the very first meeting, I could sense something was off. She had this way of looking at me like I was never going to be good enough for her precious son. The first red flag should have been during our initial dinner at their house. I wore a simple but elegant black dress that I'd bought for the occasion. Nothing too fancy, just something appropriate for meeting the parents. But the way Patricia looked me up and down when I walked in, I could tell she was already judging everything about me. She made little comments throughout the evening about how different I was from Marcus's ex-girlfriend, Jennifer. Apparently, Jennifer came from old money, had gone to the same private school as Marcus, and her family owned several businesses in town. I tried to brush it off. I figured she just needed time to get to know me. I came from a middle-class family. My dad worked construction, and my mom was a nurse. We weren't wealthy, but we were hardworking, honest people who raised me with strong values. I had worked my way through college, graduated with honors, and had a good job as a marketing coordinator at a local firm. I thought that would count for something. But Patricia seemed determined to remind me at every opportunity that I wasn't from their world. She would make subtle comments about my background, my education, my family's occupation. She'd say things like, "Oh, you went to state school. How practical." Or, "Your mother is a nurse. That must be so demanding." Always with that condescending smile that never reached her eyes. Marcus, bless his heart, either didn't notice or chose to ignore his mother's behavior. Whenever I brought it up to him, he'd say I was being too sensitive, that his mother just needed time to warm up to me. He'd promised to talk to her, but nothing ever changed. If anything, her comments became more pointed as our wedding date approached. The breaking point came 6 weeks before our wedding. We were at a family gathering for Marcus's cousin's birthday. I had saved up for weeks to buy a beautiful dress for the occasion. It wasn't designer, but it was from a nice department store, and I felt confident and pretty in it. I thought I looked appropriate for the event. But when Patricia saw me, she pulled Marcus aside. I wasn't supposed to hear their conversation, but I was coming back from the bathroom when I overheard her talking to him in the hallway. "Marcus, honey," she said in that sweet voice she reserved for him, "you really need to talk to Sarah about her presentation. I mean, look at what she's wearing. It's so obvious where she shops. And frankly, it's embarrassing for our family." I stood there frozen, listening to every word. "I know you care about her," Patricia continued, "but you have to think about your future, your reputation. What will people think when they see you with someone who clearly doesn't understand how to dress appropriately for these occasions? And the wedding. Marcus, I'm worried. She's going to want to invite all those people from her side of the family. Construction workers and nurses mixing with our friends from the country club? It's going to be awkward for everyone." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But what came next was even worse. "Look, son," Patricia said, lowering her voice even more. "I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm sure she's very nice. But marriage is about more than just feelings. It's about compatibility, about social standing, about building a life with someone who understands your world. Jennifer understood that. She knew how to dress, how to act, how to fit in, and her family could have been such an asset to your career." I heard Marcus sigh. "Mom, I love Sarah. She's kind and smart, and I'm sure she is, dear. But love isn't always enough. And honestly, it pains me to say this, but don't waste money on her clothes. She just doesn't have the natural instincts for these things. Some people are born with class, And others, well, others aren't. You can't buy good breeding, Marcus. That's when I knew I had heard enough. I quietly walked back to the party, smiled and made polite conversation for another hour, then told Marcus I had a headache and needed to go home early. He drove me back to my apartment, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother had just shattered my heart into a million pieces. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Patricia's words echoing in my mind. Don't waste money on her clothes. You can't buy good breeding. Some people are born with class, and others aren't. I felt humiliated, angry, and heartbroken all at once. But more than anything, I felt determined. I was going to show Patricia exactly what kind of person she was dealing with. I spent the next few days thinking about what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to confront her directly, to tell her I'd heard everything she said and demand an apology. Another part of me wanted to just break up with Marcus and walk away from the whole toxic situation. But then I realized there was a third option, one that would be far more satisfying. I decided to call Marcus's Aunt Linda, his father's sister, who had always been kind to me. Linda was different from Patricia in every way. She was down to earth, genuine, and had never made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I suspected she might have her own opinions about Patricia's snobbery, and I was right. When I called Linda and carefully explained what I had overheard, she was furious. "I am so sorry, honey," she said. "Patricia has always been like this. She thinks she's better than everyone else because she married into money. But you know what? She came from the same kind of background you did. Her father was a mechanic, and her mother cleaned houses. She seems to have forgotten where she came from." This was news to me. Marcus had never mentioned anything about his mother's humble beginnings. According to Linda, Patricia had worked very hard to reinvent herself after marrying Marcus's father, who came from an established wealthy family. She had spent years learning how to talk, dress, and act like she was born into high society, and now she looked down on anyone who reminded her of her own past. "You know what you should do?" Linda said. "There's a family dinner next Saturday night at the country club. Patricia specifically requested it because she wants to show off to her friends. She's been talking for weeks about how elegant and sophisticated it's going to be. You should come, and you should wear something that will remind her that class isn't about money or designer labels. It's about how you treat people." Linda's words sparked an idea. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I spent the entire week planning. First, I went to the most exclusive boutique in the city, the kind of place where a single dress costs more than most people's monthly rent. I tried on several options before finding the perfect one. A stunning midnight blue designer gown that fit me like it was made for my body. It was elegant, sophisticated, and undeniably expensive. The price tag made my eyes water, but I had been saving money for our honeymoon, and I decided this was a worthy investment. But buying the dress was only part one of my plan. Part two involved doing some research into Patricia's background. I called my friend Jessica, who worked at the local newspaper and had access to all kinds of public records and archives. I asked her to help me dig up information about Patricia's family history, and what we found was even more interesting than Linda had told me. Not only had Patricia's father been a mechanic, but her mother had actually been arrested twice for shoplifting when Patricia was a teenager. There were old newspaper clippings about it. Patricia herself had worked at a diner all through high school and had received financial aid to attend community college. She had only met Marcus's father when she was working as a waitress at a restaurant where he was having a business dinner. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of that. In fact, I respected her for working hard and building a better life for herself. But the hypocrisy of her looking down on my family's honest, hardworking background when she came from the exact same place was infuriating. Part 3 of my plan involved recruiting some allies. I reached out to Linda, who was more than happy to help me execute my strategy. I also called my own mother and explained the situation. My mom was hurt and angry about what Patricia had said, but she agreed to help me prove a point. The night of the dinner finally arrived. I spent hours getting ready, making sure every detail was perfect. I had my hair professionally styled, my makeup done by a friend who worked at a high-end salon, and I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, which had been passed down through 3 generations of strong women in my family. When I walked into that country club wearing my designer gown, I felt like $1 million. The dress was absolutely stunning, and I knew I looked good. More importantly, I felt confident and powerful, ready to face whatever Patricia might throw at me. Marcus picked me up at my apartment, and his jaw literally dropped when he saw me. "Sarah, you look incredible," he stammered. "That dress is amazing. Where did you get it?" "Oh, just a little boutique downtown," I said casually. "I thought I should make an effort for your mother's special dinner." When we arrived at the country club, I could see Patricia's friends already seated at our large table. These were the women she was trying so hard to impress, the ones she considered her peers in high society. Patricia herself was wearing what was obviously an expensive outfit, and she had clearly put a lot of effort into looking perfect for the evening. But when she saw me walk in wearing my designer gown, I watched her face go through a series of expressions. First, surprise, then confusion, then something that looked almost like panic. She knew quality when she saw it, and she could tell immediately that my dress was the real deal. "Sarah," she said, forcing a smile as we approached the table. "Don't you look nice tonight?" "Thank you, Patricia," I replied sweetly. I wanted to make sure I dressed appropriately for such an elegant occasion. Throughout dinner, I could feel Patricia watching me, trying to figure out how I could possibly afford such an expensive dress. I made polite conversation with her friends, who all seemed genuinely lovely and were very welcoming to me. Several of them complimented my dress and asked where I had gotten it. About halfway through the meal, Linda arrived as planned. She had deliberately come late so she could make an entrance, and when she saw me, she made a big show of admiring my outfit. "Sarah," she exclaimed loud enough for the whole table to hear, "that dress is absolutely gorgeous. Is that the new collection from Valentino? I saw it in Vogue last month and it must have cost a fortune." I smiled modestly. "It was a bit of a splurge," I admitted, "but sometimes you have to invest in quality." Patricia's face was getting redder by the minute. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how her son's supposedly low-class girlfriend could afford a dress that cost more than most people's cars. That's when Linda delivered the first part of our plan. "You know, Patricia," she said conversationally, "it's so refreshing to see young people who understand the value of quality over quantity. Sarah reminds me so much of you when you were her age, working so hard to build a better life for yourself." Patricia's smile became even more forced. "Oh, well, we all have our journeys in life." "Absolutely," Linda continued. "I still remember when you were working at Murphy's Diner, saving every penny so you could afford to take those etiquette classes. You were so determined to better yourself. It's inspiring, really." I watched Patricia's face turn pale. She clearly hadn't expected anyone to bring up her past, especially not in front of her country club friends. But Linda wasn't done. "And your parents must have been so proud when you married Robert," Linda went on. "I remember your father saying at the wedding that he never imagined his little girl would end up living in such a beautiful house. He was so sweet, talking about how he used to fix cars in his garage and dream about his daughter having a better life." Patricia was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Her friends were looking confused, clearly not knowing about her humble background. This was obviously not the image she had presented to them, but I wasn't done yet. It was time for part 2 of my plan. "You know, Patricia," I said, my voice sweet as honey, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last week about not wasting money on clothes and how some people are just born with class." Patricia's eyes went wide. She realized I had heard her conversation with Marcus. "I was in the hallway when you were talking to Marcus," I continued calmly. "I heard everything you said about my background, my family, and your concerns about whether I'm good enough for your son." The entire table had gone quiet. Patricia's friends were looking back and forth between us, sensing the tension but not understanding what was happening. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about your comments," I went on. And you're absolutely right about one thing. You can't buy good breeding. You can't purchase class or kindness or integrity. Those things come from how you treat people, especially people you think are beneath you. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I want you to know that this dress I'm wearing tonight, it cost $8,000. I bought it specifically for this dinner because I wanted to show you that I can afford nice things when I choose to. But more importantly, I wanted to prove a point about the difference between having money and having class. I stood up from the table, my designer gown flowing elegantly around me. You see, Patricia, I've learned some interesting things about your background this week. I know about your father's auto shop, your mother's house cleaning business, and yes, even her unfortunate legal troubles when you were younger. I know about Murphy's Diner and the etiquette classes and how you worked your way up from nothing, just like my parents did. Patricia's face was now completely white. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling in front of her most important social connections. But here's the difference between us, I continued. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of my father who builds houses with his own hands and my mother who saves lives every day. I don't look down on other people who are working hard to build better lives for themselves because I remember what it's like to struggle. I picked up my purse and looked directly at Patricia. You forgot where you came from, and that's the saddest thing of all. You've spent so much time trying to be someone else that you've lost sight of the person you used to be. The person who would have understood exactly how I felt when I heard you say those cruel things about my family. The silence at the table was deafening. Patricia's friends were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment. Linda was trying to hide a small smile behind her napkin. Marcus, I said, turning to my fiancé, who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout my speech. I need you to understand something. I didn't do this to embarrass your mother or to cause drama. I did this because I refuse to spend the rest of my life being treated like I'm not good enough for your family. If you can't stand up to her behavior, then we have bigger problems than just her disapproval. Marcus looked back and forth between his mother and me, clearly struggling with what to say. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. Sarah, he started, but I shook my head. No, Marcus. This isn't something you can fix with words or promises. This is about respect, and your mother has made it very clear that she doesn't respect me or my family. I won't tolerate that, not from her or anyone else. I looked around the table one more time. Ladies, it was lovely meeting you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. And with that, I walked out of the country club with my head held high, my $8,000 dress flowing behind me like a battle flag. I drove home in silence, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of what I had just done. Part of me felt triumphant, vindicated after weeks of enduring Patricia's passive-aggressive comments and condescending looks. But another part of me felt sad, because I knew that what had just happened would likely mean the end of my relationship with Marcus. I was right. Marcus came to my apartment the next morning, looking haggard and exhausted. We talked for hours about what had happened, about his mother's behavior, and about our future together. I could see that he was torn between his love for me and his loyalty to his family. Sarah, I love you, he said. But she's my mother. I can't just cut her out of my life. I'm not asking you to cut her out of your life, I replied. I'm asking you to set boundaries. I'm asking you to stand up for me when she says hurtful things. I'm asking you to be my partner, not just her son. But Marcus couldn't do it. He had been under his mother's influence for too long, and he couldn't break free from her control. He admitted that while he didn't agree with everything she said, he understood her concerns about our different backgrounds. Maybe we should postpone the wedding, he suggested. Give everyone time to cool down. Let things settle. I knew then that it was over. A man who truly loved me wouldn't ask me to postpone our wedding because his mother disapproved of my family's working-class background. A man who truly loved me would have stood up to her long before it got to this point. No, Marcus, I said quietly. We're not postponing anything. We're calling it off. I deserve better than this, and deep down, you know it. Breaking up with Marcus was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it was also one of the most important. I realized that I had been so focused on trying to win Patricia's approval that I had lost sight of my own self-worth. I had been willing to change myself, to diminish myself, to make myself smaller just to fit into their world. But that night at the country club, wearing that expensive dress and speaking my truth, I remembered who I really was. I was Sarah Martinez, daughter of hardworking parents who taught me to value integrity over image, kindness over status, and authenticity over acceptance. The story didn't end there, though. About a week after our breakup, I received an unexpected phone call from Linda. She told me that the country club dinner had caused quite a stir in Patricia's social circle. Apparently, several of her friends had approached Linda afterward, expressing their disappointment in Patricia's behavior and their admiration for how I had handled the situation. One of them even said she was ashamed to be associated with someone who would treat a young woman so cruelly, Linda told me. Patricia has been getting the cold shoulder from several people in her precious social circle. They're saying she's become a snob who's forgotten her roots. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness hearing this. I never wanted to destroy Patricia's friendships, but I hoped that maybe this experience would cause her to reflect on her behavior and remember the kind, hard-working woman she used to be. But the most surprising call came 2 months later. It was from Marcus's father, Robert. He asked if he could take me to lunch, saying he had some things he wanted to discuss with me. I was hesitant at first, but my curiosity got the better of me. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, and Robert immediately apologized for his wife's behavior. "Sarah, I want you to know that not all of us in the family feel the way Patricia does," he said. "I've always liked you, and I think you would have been good for Marcus." He went on to tell me that my confrontation at the country club had sparked some serious conversations in their household. Marcus had finally told his father about some of the things his mother had been saying about me and my family, and Robert was appalled. "I knew Patricia could be particular about social status," he admitted. "But I had no idea she was being so cruel to you. I'm ashamed that we didn't put a stop to it sooner." Robert also revealed that he had grown up in a working-class family himself, and that he had always valued people based on their character rather than their bank account. "My own father was a factory worker," he said. "If I had judged Patricia by her background when we first met, we never would have gotten married. The irony of her behavior toward you isn't lost on me." He told me that he had given Patricia an ultimatum. Either she needed to seriously examine her attitude and behavior, or he was going to start spending more time away from home. "I won't tolerate her treating people the way she treated you," he said firmly. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came at the end of our lunch. Robert told me that Marcus had been struggling since our breakup, that he was having serious regrets about choosing his mother's approval over our relationship. "He's miserable, Sarah. He realizes he made a mistake, but he's too proud and too ashamed to reach out to you. I think he's hoping that if enough time passes, maybe you'll be willing to give him another chance." And I appreciated Robert's honesty, but I had to be honest with him in return. "Robert, I cared deeply for Marcus, and part of me always will. But I can't be with someone who won't stand up for me, who won't defend our relationship when it's attacked." What happened at that dinner wasn't just about Patricia's behavior. It was about Marcus's response to it. Robert nodded sadly. "I understand, and I think you're making the right choice. You deserve someone who will put you first." As I drove home from that lunch, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past few months. The whole experience had been painful, but it had also been incredibly valuable. I had learned to stand up for myself, to value my own worth, and to refuse to accept treatment that diminished my dignity. That $8,000 dress had been expensive, but it had been worth every penny. Not because of how it looked or how much it cost, but because of what it represented. It represented my refusal to be made small, my determination to claim my space in any room I entered, and my commitment to honoring the strong, hardworking people who raised me. About 6 months after the breakup, I met David at a work conference. He was a project manager from a construction company, and when I told him about my father's work, his eyes lit up with respect and interest rather than judgment. He wanted to meet my parents, not because he felt obligated to, but because he was genuinely curious about the people who had raised such a strong woman. David came from a middle-class background similar to mine. His mother was a teacher, his father was an electrician, and they had instilled in him the same values my parents had given me. Work hard, treat people with respect, and never forget where you come from. When I introduced David to my parents, he spent an hour talking with my father about different construction techniques and asking my mother about her experiences as a nurse. He was genuinely interested in their lives and their work, and they could tell immediately that he saw value in who they were rather than judgment about what they weren't. The contrast between David's reaction to my family and Marcus's family's reaction was stark and telling. David saw my background as something to be proud of, not something to overcome. He appreciated the values my parents had instilled in me, rather than seeing them as obstacles to social advancement. David and I have been together for 2 years now, and we're planning our own wedding for next spring. It's going to be a celebration that includes both of our families, all of our friends, and everyone who has supported us along the way. There won't be any judgment about backgrounds or social status, just love and joy and gratitude for the people who matter most to us. I still have that designer dress hanging in my closet. Sometimes I look at it and remember that night at the country club, the night I found my voice and refused to be diminished. It reminds me that true class isn't about how much money you spend on clothes or which social circles you move in. True class is about how you treat people, especially people who can't do anything for you. I've heard through Linda that Patricia has actually changed quite a bit since that dinner. Apparently, the social consequences of her behavior, combined with Robert's ultimatum, forced her to do some serious self-reflection. She's been volunteering at a local shelter and has reportedly become much more humble and kind in her interactions with others. I'm glad to hear that she's working on herself, but I don't regret standing up to her that night. Sometimes people need to be confronted with the consequences of their actions before they're motivated to change. And sometimes, defending your dignity requires making others uncomfortable with their behavior. As for Marcus, I heard he's dating someone new, someone from his mother's social circle who apparently meets all of Patricia's criteria for the perfect daughter-in-law. I hope he's happy, and I hope he's learned something from our relationship about the importance of standing up for the people you love. But mostly, I'm grateful for how everything turned out. That painful experience taught me invaluable lessons about self-worth, about the importance of choosing partners who will defend our relationship, and about the difference between seeking approval and demanding respect. I learned that you can't buy class, but you also can't let other people's definition of class make you feel small. The most elegant thing you can wear is your dignity, and the most expensive accessory you can own is your self-respect. That night at the country club, I walked in wearing an $8,000 dress, but I walked out wearing something much more valuable. The knowledge that I am worthy of love and respect exactly as I am, regardless of where I come from or how much money my parents make. And that, more than any designer gown, is something that will never go out of style. Looking back now, I can see that Patricia's cruel comment about not wasting money on my clothes was actually a gift in disguise. It forced me to examine what I truly valued, what I was willing to accept, and what I absolutely refused to tolerate. It pushed me to find my voice and use it to defend not just myself, but everyone like me who has ever been made to feel less than because of their background. The truth is, my story wasn't just about a dress or a dinner or even a breakup. It was about learning to value myself enough to walk away from situations and people that diminish my worth. It was about understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to accept treatment that hurts your soul. I survived Patricia's cruelty, Marcus's weakness, and my own self-doubt. I came out stronger, more confident, and more clear about what I deserve in a relationship and in life. And that $8,000 dress? It was worth every single penny, not for how it looked, but for how it made me feel. Powerful, dignified, and absolutely worthy of respect. So yes, my story wasn't easy, but I survived it. And more than that, I grew from it. I learned that true elegance comes from authenticity, true class comes from kindness, and true love comes from someone who sees your worth and defends it fiercely. And those are lessons that no amount of money can buy and no one can ever take away from me.